He smirked when he saw the quiet woman approaching the gate in a simple beige coat, completely unaware that within minutes, the most powerful people in the city would rise to their feet for her. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. The rain had just stopped over downtown Chicago, leaving the streets glistening beneath the gold reflections of towering skyscrapers. Black luxury sedans lined the entrance of the Whitmore Grand Hotel, while photographers gathered behind velvet ropes, waiting for the city's most influential executives to arrive for the annual Valence Global Leadership Gala. Inside the ballroom, crystal chandeliers shimmered above marble floors polished so perfectly they reflected the lights like still water. Men in tailored tuxedos adjusted cufflinks worth more than most monthly salaries. Women in designer gowns floated through the lobby with practiced elegance. Every detail of the evening had been designed to communicate one thing: power. At the center of the entrance stood Grant Mercer, head of private event security. At 52 years old, Grant carried himself with the rigid posture of a man who believed authority alone made him important. His charcoal suit fit sharply across broad shoulders, and the silver badge pinned to his lapel gleamed beneath the hotel lights. Years working elite corporate events had convinced him he could identify wealth within seconds. The expensive watch, the custom shoes, the posture, the confidence. To Grant Mercer, successful people looked successful, and anyone who didn't fit the image simply didn't belong. Keep the line moving, he muttered into his earpiece while scanning arriving guests with cold efficiency. A black Rolls-Royce pulled up first. Grant instantly smiled. Good evening, Mr. Patterson. Then came a state senator surrounded by assistants, a famous venture capitalist, 2 professional athletes. Grant greeted them all with polished respect. But then his expression shifted. Across the wet sidewalk, walking alone beneath the glow of the hotel canopy, came a woman no one seemed to notice at first. Vivian Hale moved quietly through the crowd wearing a simple camel-colored coat over a dark navy dress. No diamonds, no entourage, no dramatic entrance. Her shoulder-length blonde hair framed a calm face untouched by arrogance, and the only thing she carried was a slim leather portfolio tucked beneath one arm. She looked more like a university professor than someone attending one of the most exclusive corporate events in America. Several guests brushed past her without a second glance. One valet assumed she was lost. Another thought she might be hotel staff. Vivian didn't react. She simply continued walking toward the entrance with steady eyes and measured steps. From across the driveway, Grant noticed her immediately. His gaze traveled over her coat, her practical black heels, the absence of jewelry, and the older sedan parked half a block away that she had stepped out of moments earlier. His jaw tightened. In his mind, the conclusion was instant. She didn't belong here. Tyler Quinn, a 24-year-old junior security assistant standing nearby, followed Grant's stare. Maybe she's with one of the sponsors, Tyler offered carefully. Grant scoffed under his breath. Trust me, he replied quietly. People at this level don't show up looking like that. Vivian stepped beneath the hotel awning just as another flash of cameras lit the entrance. Rainwater dripped softly from the edge of her coat while she approached the security checkpoint with calm composure. Good evening, she said politely. I'm here for the gala. Grant stepped directly into her path. Invitation. His tone had already changed. It was colder now, sharper. Vivian glanced toward him without irritation. My name is Vivian Hale. Grant waited. Nothing about the name registered to him. Do you have the physical invitation, ma'am? Vivian reached into her portfolio slowly. I believe my assistant sent the credentials digitally. Grant barely looked. This event is restricted to executive-level guests and approved investors only. Tyler shifted uncomfortably beside him. Something about the woman's calmness felt strange. Most people became defensive under pressure. But Vivian Hale simply stood there quietly, while luxury vehicles rolled past behind her and guests whispered nearby. Grant folded his hands in front of him. "I'm going to need you to step aside until we verify who you are." Vivian studied him for a brief moment. Not angry, not embarrassed, just thoughtful. And somehow, that unsettled Tyler more than if she had argued. Because people who truly belonged in powerful rooms rarely felt the need to prove it. The air beneath the hotel canopy suddenly felt colder as guests slowed their steps to watch the quiet exchange unfolding at the entrance. Vivian Hale remained standing near the velvet ropes while luxury cars continued pulling up behind her one after another, their headlights washing across the rain-soaked pavement in flashes of white and gold. Grant Mercer kept his posture firm, one hand resting near the tablet attached to his security station, while his expression hardened with growing certainty. In his mind, this woman was becoming a problem. And Grant Mercer hated problems that threatened the smooth image of high-profile events. "Name again?" he asked flatly, though she had already told him twice. "Vivian Hale," she repeated calmly. Tyler Quinn noticed something strange immediately. The woman never raised her voice. She did not fidget. She did not look embarrassed the way most rejected guests did when denied access in public. Instead, she simply watched Grant with quiet patience, almost as if she had seen situations like this many times before. "I am not finding your credentials," Grant announced after pretending to scroll through his screen for several seconds. Vivian glanced toward the ballroom entrance where soft piano music drifted through the glass doors. "That is unusual," she said softly. "I was told the executive board would be expecting me." Grant nearly smiled at the sentence. Executive board. The words sounded ridiculous coming from someone dressed in such understated simplicity. Behind them, a pair of women wearing designer gowns exchanged amused looks. One whispered something into the other's ear before quietly laughing. Grant noticed and felt his confidence grow stronger. Public approval always made men like him bolder. "Ma'am," he said, lowering his voice with artificial politeness. "This event is attended by some of the most influential business leaders in the country. We cannot simply allow people inside because they claim to know someone." Vivian tilted her head slightly. "I understand." "Good," Grant replied quickly. "Then you understand why I need you to step aside until we sort this out." The rain outside had fully stopped now, but cold winds still swept through the driveway every time the hotel doors opened. Tyler watched Vivian carefully as loose strands of blonde hair moved softly beside her face. She looked tired more than offended, like someone who had spent years carrying responsibilities far heavier than this moment. "Would you like me to contact someone for verification?" Tyler asked quietly before Grant could stop him. Grant shot him a sharp look. "We already handled it." Vivian's eyes moved toward Tyler for the first time. There was warmth there, appreciation. "Thank you," she said gently. "That is very kind." Grant crossed his arms. "Look, if you are here for catering or hotel administration, staff check-in is around the east side of the building." Tyler's stomach tightened immediately after the words left Grant's mouth. Even some nearby guests seemed uncomfortable now. But Grant continued speaking anyway. "This entrance is reserved for executive guests, board members, and major investors." Vivian stared at him silently for several seconds. Not angry, not defensive, just still. The kind of stillness that slowly changes the atmosphere of a room. "You seem very certain about who belongs here," she finally said. Grant gave a short nod. "That is literally my job." "I see." Tyler noticed her grip tighten slightly around the leather portfolio beneath her arm, though her expression never changed. Somewhere deeper inside the hotel, applause briefly erupted from the ballroom stage before fading again beneath the music. More guests streamed past the checkpoint carrying crystal champagne glasses handed out by attendants inside. Several of them now openly stared at Vivian with curiosity. Grant lowered his voice again, though not enough to hide the condescension. "Honestly, you are making this harder on yourself than it needs to be." Vivian blinked slowly. "Am I?" "Yes." He gestured toward the driveway. "Most people would simply leave once they realized this was not their event. Tyler immediately regretted hearing that sentence spoken aloud, because something shifted the moment Grant said it. Vivian Hale's eyes lifted toward the grand ballroom beyond the glass doors, toward the glowing chandeliers and the executives gathering inside beneath banners carrying the silver crest of Valence Global. For the first time since arriving, her expression changed slightly. Not hurt, not humiliation, disappointment, quiet disappointment, and somehow that felt far heavier than anger. Interesting, she said softly. After all these years, people still confuse simplicity with insignificance. Grant frowned. Excuse me? But before Vivian could answer, movement inside the ballroom suddenly caught Tyler's attention. Several executives near the entrance had abruptly turned toward the lobby as murmurs began spreading rapidly through the crowd. One sentence moved from person to person in quick whispers that seemed to ripple through the enormous room like electricity. She is here. The whisper moved through the ballroom with strange speed, passing from table to table beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers, while conversations slowly began to die. At first, Grant Mercer did not notice the shift. His attention remained fixed on Vivian Hale as she stood near the entrance with calm, almost unsettling composure. But Tyler Quinn noticed immediately. The atmosphere inside the hotel had changed. Executives who moments earlier had been laughing beside champagne towers were suddenly turning toward the lobby doors. Several members of the event staff straightened nervously. A woman near the registration table quickly adjusted her blazer and checked her reflection in a mirrored column. Something important was happening. Grant frowned toward the ballroom. "What now?" he muttered under his breath. Vivian remained silent. The soft piano music drifting through the hotel seemed quieter now, almost distant beneath the growing tension spreading through the room. Tyler swallowed hard as he watched a tall silver-haired man inside the ballroom abruptly stop speaking mid-sentence after spotting the woman standing outside the entrance checkpoint. The man's expression completely changed. "No way," Tyler whispered softly. Grant turned sharply. "What?" But before Tyler could answer, movement erupted near the center of the ballroom. Eleanor Whitford, chairwoman of the Valence Global Executive Board, had just entered from a private hallway near the stage. At 63 years old, Eleanor carried the kind of presence that instantly commanded attention without effort. Her black evening gown moved elegantly across the marble floor while members of the board quickly stepped aside around her. Eleanor had spent 30 years building one of the largest technology empires in the country, and people listened the moment she spoke. Yet now, for the first time that evening, Eleanor Whitford looked genuinely startled. Her eyes locked directly onto Vivian Hale standing outside the ballroom doors. The color visibly drained from her face. "Oh my God!" she breathed. One of the executives beside her blinked in confusion. "Eleanor!" But she was already moving. Fast. The sharp rhythm of her heels echoed across the marble floors as conversations around the ballroom collapsed into confused silence. Guests turned one by one to follow her line of sight. Grant Mercer straightened instinctively the moment he recognized Eleanor approaching. Finally, someone important had arrived to deal with the situation properly. He adjusted his jacket quickly. "Ms. Whitford," he began confidently, stepping forward. "We have a woman here claiming—" Eleanor walked directly past him as though he did not exist. "Vivian." The single word stopped the entire entrance area cold. Tyler felt his stomach drop instantly. Eleanor Whitford reached Vivian and grasped both of her hands warmly, relief flooding her expression. "We have been trying to reach you for the last 20 minutes, she said breathlessly. "Everyone has been waiting." Grant's confident posture faltered. "Waiting?" he repeated quietly. Several nearby executives had now gathered close enough to hear the exchange. One man in a tuxedo nearly choked on his drink after finally recognizing Vivian's face. Another board member immediately lowered his head respectfully. Tyler looked back and forth between them in disbelief. Vivian offered Eleanor a small apologetic smile. "I was delayed outside." The sentence was soft, gentle, but it landed with devastating weight. Eleanor's expression shifted instantly as her eyes moved toward Grant Mercer. "Outside?" she repeated slowly. The air around the entrance seemed to freeze. Grant opened his mouth, but no words came out. For the first time all evening, uncertainty appeared in his eyes. Eleanor looked back toward Vivian with visible embarrassment. "I am so sorry," she said quietly. "This should never have happened." Around them, more guests were beginning to recognize the woman standing beneath the hotel lights. Murmurs spread rapidly again, but this time the whispers carried shock instead of amusement. "That is Vivian Hale, the founder. She owns nearly 40% of Valence Global. She built the entire company." Grant's face lost color with every sentence. Tyler stared at Vivian in disbelief. The quiet woman in the simple coat. The woman Grant had mistaken for hotel staff. The woman left standing in the cold while executives walked past her without noticing. She was not merely attending the gala. She was the reason it existed. Vivian finally turned her eyes back toward Grant. Her expression remained calm, but the silence around them had become crushing now. Hundreds of eyes watched the scene unfold from inside the ballroom. Crystal glasses remained frozen midair. Conversations had completely stopped. Even the piano player inside had quietly lowered his hands from the keys. Grant forced an awkward smile onto his face. "Ms. Hale," he stammered softly. "I did not realize—" "No," Vivian interrupted gently. "You realized exactly what you chose to see." The room went silent. Grant Mercer felt every pair of eyes in the ballroom land on him at once, and for the first time in years, the man who prided himself on controlling every entrance, every guest list, and every situation no longer seemed certain of anything. The silence surrounding the hotel lobby had become almost unbearable. Even the soft hum of conversation from distant corners of the ballroom had disappeared completely. Vivian Hale stood calmly beneath the chandelier light while Eleanor Whitford remained beside her, visibly disturbed by what had just unfolded. Tyler Quinn could practically hear Grant's confidence collapsing in real time. "Ms. Hale," Grant said again, this time with a strained smile that looked painfully unnatural on his face. "There appears to have been a misunderstanding." Vivian looked at him quietly. "Was there?" The question was not sharp. It was not angry. That somehow made it worse. Grant cleared his throat quickly. "We handle a large number of guests at events like this. Security protocols require us to verify identities carefully." Eleanor's expression hardened immediately. "You told the founder of this company to use the staff in trance?" she asked coldly. Grant opened his mouth, but no answer came fast enough. Nearby executives shifted awkwardly, while several guests lowered their eyes in embarrassment. Tyler noticed the two women who had laughed at Vivian earlier suddenly avoiding eye contact entirely. The energy of the room had changed completely now. 20 minutes earlier, Vivian had been invisible to them. Now nobody could stop watching her. Vivian adjusted the sleeve of her coat gently before speaking. "Security procedures are not the problem," she said calmly. "The problem is deciding someone's worth before knowing anything about them." The sentence landed across the ballroom like a weight pressing down on every person listening. Grant felt heat rising into his face. "I assure you, that was not my intention." But even he no longer sounded convinced by his own words. Vivian's eyes moved briefly across the crowd gathered near the entrance. Wealthy investors, politicians, executives, people who spent entire careers trying to appear important. "Interesting thing about power," she said softly. "The people who truly have it rarely need to announce it." The room remained completely still. Tyler felt chills move through him. It was not simply what she said. It was how effortlessly she said it. No raised voice, no dramatic speech, just quiet truth delivered with absolute confidence. Eleanor stepped forward slightly beside Vivian. "The board has been waiting for your opening remarks," she said carefully, clearly trying to redirect the moment before the humiliation became even worse for everyone involved. Vivian nodded once. "Of course." Grant immediately stepped aside from the entrance path, nearly stumbling over his own words. "Please," he said quickly. "Right this way, Ms. Hale." But Vivian did not move yet. Instead, she looked toward Tyler Quinn. The young security assistant straightened instinctively when her eyes met his. "Thank you for offering to help earlier," she said gently. Tyler looked stunned. I did not really do anything." Vivian gave him a faint smile. Most people do not realize how rare basic kindness has become. Tyler swallowed hard, suddenly feeling embarrassed by how little courage he had actually shown while Grant humiliated her. Around them, executives began quietly stepping aside to create a clear path toward the ballroom doors. Some lowered their heads respectfully as Vivian passed. Others looked visibly uncomfortable, remembering how quickly they had judged her moments earlier based entirely on appearance. The massive ballroom beyond the glass entrance now seemed different somehow. Less glamorous, less untouchable. The gold lighting still reflected beautifully across polished marble floors, but beneath all the luxury, something raw had been exposed tonight. Character. And not everyone in the room had passed the test. Vivian finally stepped forward beside Eleanor toward the ballroom entrance. The crowd instinctively parted for her in complete silence. The sound of her heels against marble echoed softly through the enormous room. Grant remained standing near the security station, frozen beneath the weight of hundreds of silent glances passing judgment on him now. He had spent years believing he could identify important people by watches, suits, and expensive cars. But the woman he had dismissed in a simple coat had built the very empire surrounding him tonight. Tyler glanced toward Grant carefully. The older man looked smaller somehow, not physically, but morally, as if the authority he wore so proudly minutes ago had suddenly evaporated beneath the truth everyone had just witnessed. Vivian reached the ballroom entrance, then paused one final time before entering. Without turning around fully, she spoke softly enough that the silence carried every word across the room. "The easiest way to recognize true class is simple," she said. "Watch how someone treats people they believe cannot benefit them." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. And in that moment, surrounded by crystal chandeliers and billion-dollar reputations, an entire ballroom quietly realized the most powerful person in the building had arrived wearing nothing except dignity. The ballroom remained unnaturally quiet as Vivian Hale walked across the marble floor beside Eleanor Whitford, and the silence itself seemed to carry more weight than applause ever could. Crystal chandeliers shimmered overhead, while hundreds of influential guests watched her pass with expressions that had transformed completely within minutes. Earlier, many of them had barely acknowledged her existence. Now executives stepped aside instinctively as though royalty had entered the room. Tyler Quinn remained near the entrance, still trying to process everything he had witnessed. Grant Mercer stood several feet away beside the security station, staring toward the ballroom with a face drained of confidence. The powerful posture he had worn all evening was gone now. In its place stood a man slowly realizing that one moment of arrogance could dismantle a reputation built over decades. Vivian reached the center aisle leading toward the elevated stage, where the Valence global crest glowed beneath soft golden lights. Eleanor leaned closer as they walked. "The board is deeply embarrassed," she said quietly. "This should never have happened to you." Vivian kept her eyes forward. "It did not happen to me alone," she replied calmly. "That is the problem." Eleanor looked at her carefully but said nothing. Deep down, she understood exactly what Vivian meant. Tonight was not truly about one woman being denied entry. It was about how quickly human beings decide who deserves dignity and who does not. At the far side of the ballroom, several executives who had laughed earlier now looked deeply uncomfortable. One man avoided eye contact completely as Vivian passed near his table. Another quietly set down his champagne glass, unable to hide the shame creeping across his face. The atmosphere of superiority that had filled the room earlier suddenly felt fragile now, almost artificial beneath the truth that had been exposed at the entrance. Vivian finally stepped onto the stage while the ballroom remained completely still. The massive screen behind her displayed the silver Valence global logo across deep blue velvet curtains. For a brief moment, she simply looked out across the crowd. Politicians, investors, celebrities, board members, people who controlled billion-dollar industries. Yet none of them seemed comfortable anymore. because every person in the room knew exactly what had happened outside those ballroom doors. Vivian rested one hand lightly against the podium. "Good evening," she began softly. Her voice was calm, measured, almost gentle. But every corner of the ballroom listened instantly. "Before tonight's program continues, there is something important I would like to address." Eleanor lowered her eyes slightly beside the stage. Across the room, Grant Mercer stiffened where he stood near the entrance. Vivian paused briefly, allowing the silence to settle deeper. "Companies spend enormous amounts of money creating mission statements about leadership, culture, and respect," she continued. "But the truth is much simpler than that." No one moved. Even the servers carrying silver trays through the ballroom had stopped walking. A company's true culture reveals itself long before the chief executive enters the room. Several guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Vivian's gaze moved slowly across the audience. It reveals itself in how receptionists greet strangers, in how assistants are treated during stressful moments, in how security speaks to people they believe are unimportant. The words landed heavily across the ballroom. Grant lowered his head slightly. Tyler glanced toward him, watching the realization settle deeper with every sentence Vivian spoke. But there was no cruelty in her voice. That was what made the moment unforgettable. She was not humiliating him. She was teaching the room. "I built Valence Global with one belief," Vivian continued quietly. "That intelligence means nothing without humility. And success means nothing if kindness disappears the moment status enters the conversation." The ballroom remained frozen beneath the glow of chandeliers. Vivian's simple navy dress, understated coat folded neatly across a nearby chair now seemed more powerful than all the luxury surrounding her. Because real authority had never been about appearances. It was about presence, about character, about remaining calm when others revealed who they truly were. Vivian finally stepped away from the podium slightly. "Tonight," she said softly, "I was reminded how easy it is for people to mistake simplicity for weakness." Her eyes moved briefly toward the entrance where Grant stood motionless beneath the hotel lights. "But the strongest people I have ever known rarely needed to look powerful in order to be respected." A hush fell over the room so complete it almost felt sacred. Tyler realized then that nobody in the ballroom would remember the decorations, the speeches, or the expensive wine from tonight. They would remember this moment instead. The moment a quiet woman in a simple coat walked into a room full of powerful people and reminded every single one of them what dignity actually looked like. For several long seconds after Vivian Hale stepped away from the podium, nobody in the ballroom seemed to remember how to speak. The silence hanging beneath the chandeliers felt heavier now, filled with discomfort, reflection, and the quiet collapse of pride. Then slowly, almost cautiously at first, people began rising from their seats. One executive stood, then another. Within moments, the entire ballroom was on its feet. The applause started softly but quickly grew into something powerful enough to echo against the marble walls and crystal ceilings of the Whitmore Grand Hotel. Vivian remained calm as she looked across the crowd. She did not smile triumphantly. She did not bask in the attention. She simply nodded once in appreciation, as though the standing ovation belonged less to her and more to the lesson itself. Eleanor Whitford stepped beside her near the stage with visible emotion in her eyes. "You just changed this company tonight," she whispered quietly. Vivian gave a faint smile. Then perhaps tonight was necessary. Near the entrance, Tyler Quinn joined the applause slowly, still stunned by everything he had witnessed. Around him, guests who had ignored Vivian earlier now clapped with genuine admiration. Some looked inspired, others looked ashamed, but all of them understood one thing clearly now. The woman they dismissed in a simple coat possessed more dignity than anyone else in the room. Grant Mercer remained standing near the security station while applause thundered around him. Yet he did not clap. His face carried the hollow expression of a man replaying every decision he had made over the last 30 minutes. Every assumption, every dismissive glance, every careless sentence spoken with certainty. Tyler glanced toward him carefully. For the first time all evening, Grant looked old. Not physically, spiritually, as if the confidence he built his identity around had cracked open in front of hundreds of witnesses. Eventually the applause softened, and guests slowly returned to their seats. Vivian stepped down from the stage while servers resumed moving quietly between tables. The piano music returned gently in the background, though the atmosphere of the gala had changed forever. People spoke more softly now, more carefully. A few executives approached Vivian personally to apologize for not intervening earlier. Others introduced themselves despite already knowing exactly who she was, suddenly eager to appear respectful. Vivian treated each person with calm courtesy, never embarrassing anyone publicly. That restraint impressed Tyler more than anything else. Most people with power would have humiliated Grant. Immediately after what happened, Vivian never did. She allowed the lesson itself to speak louder than revenge. As the evening continued, Grant finally forced himself to move from the entrance. His polished shoes echoed faintly against marble floors while he approached Eleanor Whitford near the side of the ballroom. "Ms. Whitford," he said quietly, his voice lacking all previous authority. "I understand if my services are no longer needed after tonight." Eleanor looked at him carefully for several seconds before answering. "That decision is not mine," she replied calmly. Grant nodded stiffly. He already knew whose decision mattered now. Across the ballroom, Vivian stood near a group of junior employees who looked nervous speaking to her. Yet unlike the executives surrounding her earlier, Vivian listened attentively to each young worker with genuine interest. Tyler noticed how different her conversations looked compared to everyone else in the room. She never tried to dominate attention. She made people feel seen. And perhaps that was why employees remained loyal to her company after all these years. Not because they feared her power, but because they trusted her character. Later that evening, as guests began preparing for the final presentation, Vivian quietly stepped away from the crowd and walked toward the tall windows overlooking downtown Chicago. Rain still shimmered across the city streets below, while traffic lights reflected red and gold across wet pavement. Tyler hesitated briefly before approaching her. "Ms. Hale?" he asked carefully. Vivian turned toward him with the same calm expression she had carried all night. "Yes." Tyler shifted nervously. "I just wanted to apologize for not speaking up sooner outside." Vivian studied him gently before answering. "You did speak up." Tyler blinked. "Not really. Kindness rarely begins loudly," Vivian said softly. "Most people wait for courage to become comfortable before acting. But by then, the moment usually passes." Tyler lowered his eyes thoughtfully. Vivian looked back toward the glowing skyline beyond the glass. "The important thing," she continued quietly, "is deciding what kind of person you become after witnessing something wrong." Tyler stood there silently as her words settled deeper than he expected. And somewhere across the ballroom, Grant Mercer watched the conversation from a distance, finally understanding that the most powerful lesson of his career had come from the one person he believed did not belong in the room. As the gala moved into its final hour, the energy inside the Whitmore Grand Hotel no longer resembled the polished corporate performance that had existed earlier that evening. Something more honest had settled over the ballroom now. Conversations sounded quieter. Laughter felt less forced. Even the executives who usually competed for attention seemed strangely reflective after Vivian Hale's speech. The massive windows overlooking downtown Chicago framed a skyline glowing against the damp night while soft jazz drifted through hidden speakers beneath the chandeliers. Yet despite the luxury surrounding them, most people in the room could not stop thinking about what happened at the entrance. Tyler Quinn certainly could not. From his position near the ballroom doors, he watched guests interact with Vivian throughout the evening. CEOs leaned forward carefully when speaking to her. Investors listened closely when she offered opinions. Junior employees looked relieved whenever she smiled at them. What struck Tyler most was how differently Vivian treated people compared to nearly everyone else in the building. She gave the same attention to a nervous intern that she gave to billionaire donors. No performance, no superiority, just respect. Meanwhile, Grant Mercer remained isolated near the edge of the ballroom, quietly observing the event he once controlled with confidence. Nobody avoided him openly, but the shift was obvious. Earlier that evening, people had greeted him warmly because authority attracts attention. Now many passed him with only polite nods. The difference stung more than he expected. Grant spent years believing his position gave him importance. Tonight he discovered how fragile borrowed authority truly was. Across the ballroom, Eleanor Whitford approached Vivian again, while several board members gathered nearby. The press is asking whether you would like to make an official statement regarding the incident, Eleanor said carefully. Vivian glanced toward the photographers near the rear of the ballroom. No, Eleanor looked surprised. You do not want the company to address what happened publicly? Vivian shook her head gently. Public humiliation does not teach people dignity. It usually teaches fear. Eleanor studied her thoughtfully. Most executives would have demanded someone lose their job tonight. Vivian's expression remained calm. Then most executives misunderstand leadership. Several board members exchanged uneasy glances after hearing that. Vivian noticed. A culture built on fear creates people who hide mistakes, she continued softly. A culture built on accountability creates people who grow from them. Near the ballroom entrance, Grant lowered his eyes after hearing every word. Tyler noticed it immediately. The older man was listening carefully now, not defensively, as though each sentence was dismantling something inside him piece by piece. A few minutes later, Vivian quietly excused herself from the board and walked toward the refreshment tables near the back of the ballroom. Tyler hesitated briefly before approaching again. Ms. Hale? He asked carefully. Vivian looked up from her glass of sparkling water. Tyler, right? The fact that she remembered his name instantly caught him off guard. Yes, ma'am. Vivian smiled faintly. You do not need to call me ma'am every 30 seconds. Tyler laughed nervously. Sorry. For the first time all night, the atmosphere around them felt almost normal. Tyler glanced across the ballroom toward Grant. Do you think he deserves to lose everything over one mistake? He asked quietly before he could stop himself. Vivian remained silent for a moment. The lights above reflected softly across the crystal glasses surrounding them. That depends, she finally said, on whether it was truly one mistake. Tyler frowned slightly. Vivian continued calmly. People reveal their character through patterns, not isolated moments. The question is not whether someone failed once. The question is whether they are willing to become honest after failing. Tyler looked down thoughtfully. Do people actually change? Vivian's eyes moved toward the ballroom where executives continued networking beneath the golden lights. Sometimes humiliation hardens people, she said quietly. But sometimes it humbles them. At that exact moment, Grant Mercer finally began walking toward them. Tyler immediately stiffened. The older man moved slower now, his usual rigid confidence replaced by visible hesitation. Several nearby guests subtly turned their attention toward the approaching conversation. Grant stopped several feet away from Vivian before speaking. Ms. Hale, he said quietly, may I have a moment? Vivian faced him calmly. Grant swallowed hard, clearly struggling to find the right words. I spent most of my career believing I was good at reading people, he admitted. Tonight made me realize I have mostly been reading appearances. The honesty in his voice surprised Tyler completely. Grant lowered his eyes briefly. I embarrassed you publicly, he continued. And worse than that, I embarrassed the values this company claims to represent. Vivian watched him silently while the ballroom around them grew quieter once again. I cannot undo what happened, Grant said softly. But I wanted to apologize directly instead of hiding behind excuses. For several long seconds, nobody spoke. Then Vivian gave a small nod. Thank you for saying that honestly. Grant looked genuinely relieved, though still ashamed. Vivian held his gaze steadily. Character is not measured by never making mistakes, she said quietly. It is measured by what someone does after realizing they were wrong. The room fell silent again. But this time, the silence no longer carried humiliation. Carried reflection. The gala slowly approached its conclusion, but the atmosphere inside the Whitmore Grand Hotel no longer revolved around business deals, investment portfolios, or political connections. The event had transformed into something far more human. Conversations that once centered around stock values and acquisitions now carried quieter undertones about respect, humility, and the uncomfortable realization that many people in the room had spent years confusing wealth with worth. Vivian Hale moved calmly through the ballroom as though none of the evening's tension had ever touched her. Yet everywhere she walked, people watched carefully. Not because of her title anymore, but because of the composure she carried so effortlessly. Tyler Quinn noticed that even the hotel staff seemed different around her now. Servers smiled more genuinely when she thanked them. Valets straightened proudly when she greeted them by name. It was as though her presence reminded people they mattered beyond the invisible hierarchy wealthy environments often create. Near the entrance, Grant Mercer remained unusually quiet while assisting guests preparing to leave for the evening. But something about him had changed too. Tyler could see it clearly. Earlier that night, Grant had monitored people with suspicion, constantly measuring status through clothing, posture, and appearances. Now he seemed to study faces differently, as though trying to see the human being underneath the image for the first time in years. Around 10:30 that evening, Eleanor Whitford returned to the stage for the gala's final announcement. "Before we conclude tonight," she said into the microphone, "there is one additional matter I would like to address." The ballroom gradually quieted again. Eleanor glanced toward Vivian standing near the windows overlooking the city skyline. Leadership is often discussed as strategy, intelligence, and influence, Eleanor continued carefully. But tonight reminded all of us that leadership begins much earlier than that. It begins with how we treat people when we believe nobody important is watching. Several guests lowered their eyes slightly after hearing the words. Eleanor paused briefly. Starting tomorrow morning, Valence Global will launch a company-wide initiative focused on employee dignity, hospitality standards, and leadership accountability across every level of our organization. Quiet murmurs spread through the ballroom. Board members nodded thoughtfully while executives exchanged reflective glances. And this initiative, Eleanor added softly, was inspired entirely by Vivian Hale. Applause filled the room again, though gentler this time, more sincere. Vivian gave only a small nod in response before quietly stepping away from the crowd toward the hotel lobby. Tyler noticed and instinctively followed at a respectful distance. The lobby beyond the ballroom felt calmer now. Most photographers had already left, and the rain outside had finally stopped completely. Through the massive glass windows, downtown Chicago shimmered beneath reflections of streetlights and wet pavement stretching for blocks. Vivian paused near the front entrance where the evening had begun hours earlier. The same marble floor, the same golden lights, but everything felt different now. Tyler approached slowly. "You are leaving already?" he asked. Vivian smiled faintly. "I have never enjoyed staying at parties too long." Tyler laughed softly before becoming serious again. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." He hesitated briefly. "Why did you never tell anyone who you were outside earlier? You could have stopped all of it immediately." Vivian looked toward the empty driveway where luxury cars had lined up earlier that night. "Because sometimes people reveal themselves most honestly before they know who they are speaking to." Tyler absorbed the answer quietly. It made painful sense now. Vivian folded her coat gently over one arm. "Titles create artificial kindness," she continued softly. "But character reveals itself when there is nothing to gain." Behind them, the ballroom doors opened again as several executives exited into the lobby. The moment they saw Vivian near the entrance, their posture changed instantly. Respectful smiles, careful greetings. Tyler noticed it immediately. So did Vivian. Yet she simply nodded politely without judgment. Grant Mercer appeared a few moments later from the far side of the lobby. He stopped several feet away, clearly uncertain whether to approach again. Vivian looked toward him calmly. "Mr. Mercer," she said gently. Grant nodded once. "I wanted you to know," he said quietly. "I submitted a formal recommendation tonight." Tyler looked surprised. "For what?" Grant glanced briefly toward Tyler before answering. "For him." Tyler blinked in confusion. Grant continued, softly, People who still notice basic decency under pressure are rare in this industry. We need more of that. Tyler stared speechlessly while Vivian's expression softened slightly. For the first time all evening, Grant no longer sounded like a man protecting authority. He sounded like someone finally learning humility. Vivian gave a small approving nod. Then perhaps tonight was valuable for more than one reason. Grant lowered his head quietly. Outside, the city lights reflected beautifully across rain-darkened streets, while the final guests slowly disappeared into the Chicago night. And standing beneath the same hotel entrance where judgment had once unfolded so publicly, 3 people quietly understood something the ballroom would remember long after the gala ended. Respect is never proven by status. It is proven by how someone chooses to see others before knowing their value. By the time the final guests departed the Whitmore Grand Hotel, midnight had settled quietly over downtown Chicago. The rain clouds had finally broken apart, revealing reflections of city lights stretching endlessly across wet streets below the towering skyline. Inside the nearly empty lobby, hotel staff moved more slowly now, exhausted from the long evening but strangely thoughtful after everything they had witnessed. The energy of the gala had faded, yet the lesson left behind still lingered in every corner of the building. Vivian Hale stood near the entrance for one last moment before leaving, her beige coat draped neatly over her arm while the revolving doors turned softly behind her. The massive ballroom that had once overflowed with noise and status now sat mostly silent in the distance beneath dimmed chandeliers. Tyler Quinn approached carrying a small umbrella from the coat desk. "You might need this," he said awkwardly. Vivian smiled warmly. "Thank you." Tyler hesitated before speaking again. "I do not think anyone here is going to forget tonight." Vivian glanced back toward the ballroom. "I hope they do not remember me," she said quietly. "I hope they remember the feeling." Tyler frowned slightly. "What feeling?" Vivian looked toward him carefully. "The moment they realized. They judged someone before knowing them." Tyler lowered his eyes thoughtfully. Earlier that evening, he had admired the glamour of the gala, the luxury cars, the expensive suits, the executives who carried themselves like royalty. But now all of that felt smaller somehow, temporary. What stayed with him instead was the image of a quiet woman standing calmly at the entrance while an entire room unknowingly revealed its character around her. Nearby, Grant Mercer finished speaking with the final security staff before slowly walking toward the lobby doors. He no longer carried himself with the same sharp authority from earlier that evening. The rigid confidence was gone. In its place stood something more honest. Humility. Grant stopped a respectful distance from Vivian. "My wife called earlier tonight," he said unexpectedly. Vivian looked at him with quiet curiosity. She watched part of the gala online after the speech. Grant gave a faint, embarrassed smile. "She said something to me that I cannot stop thinking about." Vivian waited patiently. Grant exhaled slowly. "She said that somewhere along the way, I became more concerned with protecting important people than respecting ordinary ones." The words hung quietly in the nearly empty lobby. Tyler remained still beside them. Grant looked toward the marble entrance where the evening's humiliation had unfolded hours earlier. "The strange thing is," he admitted softly, "I used to be the exact opposite when I was younger." Vivian studied him gently. "Then perhaps that part of you is not gone." Grant looked surprised by the response. Most powerful people would have enjoyed seeing him crushed after tonight. But Vivian never once tried to destroy him. She simply forced him to face himself honestly. And somehow that was harder. Outside, a cool breeze swept through the city streets as a black town car quietly pulled beneath the hotel canopy. The driver stepped out immediately and opened the rear door. Vivian turned back toward Tyler and Grant one final time. "People spend their entire lives chasing importance," she said softly. "But in the end, most will only be remembered for how they made others feel." Neither man spoke, because deep down both understood the truth in her words. Vivian stepped toward the car, then paused briefly beneath the glow of the hotel lights. "Tonight was uncomfortable," she continued quietly. "But discomfort is not always a bad thing. Sometimes it is the beginning of growth." Grant lowered his head slightly